It is my great pleasure to welcome you to Pat Conroy Literary Center. This is a brand new building. This is the second event that we've had here. And we are so proud of our new building. And all of you are our lifeblood. We could not do this without your support. And those of you who come and participate in our programs, who donate, who are just follow us on Facebook, whatever you do, we are so happy to have you as part of our family. And we want to do a lot more great things in this area. And we have a wider outreach too. So we're just really excited about our program, and especially welcome all of you. Please come back. Please come to more programs. We want these to be special so that every time we have one, you'll say, gosh, I had so much fun that last week. I want to come back. We are really honored today to have such a distinguished bestselling, internationally bestselling author with us. Really, really excited about Kristin being able to be here as part of her book tour to be with us. I didn't even know where to start introducing her, because when you have so many accolades, you kind of look around and say, what am I going to say about this person? That just doesn't sound like I'm giving a, overblown blurb or something. So it was a difficult chore. I just decided, to go for it, because we are very honored, Kristin, to have you here. I don't know too many writers that I've introduced that I can say this line. Her work has been translated into 28 languages. Some of us get a language or two, so she is definitely an international best-selling author. And another thing about her that I found extremely interesting is that she is a prodigy. There's not too many writers that I introduced that I can say started working as a writer at age 16, so I'm still in high school, but especially this cute little petite thing over here as a sports writer for the illustrious St. Petersburg Times, which were either Rick Bragg or Mary Kay there.
Rick Bragg was there, yeah.
Okay.
So
you were in good company there, but she was still in high school. But since that time, for over 20 years, she has been a reporter for People magazine, which we all enjoy very much. One thing that struck me so much in going over Kristin's material and preparing for this introduction is the immense variety of her work and her she's primarily listed, which I don't know how they can say that with 14 books, but when I looked you up as a magazine writer, but I would say novelist of very esteemed novelists as well, with so many different, with 14 books. And some of them are, more fun beach reads or romantic, like romantic comedy type of things. I couldn't help but love. I was jealous of a lot of your titles, but How to Sleep with a Movie Star.
not a real fancy guy, I promise, not a real fancy guy.
I was going to send George Clooney. And so I wondered, and looking over this, and I hope you might talk about this, where exactly began to segue into historic fiction, which has sort of really been your calling card. It's not, there again, too many writers that I get to introduce that has a professional book credit, not just one of your friends giving you a blurb. saying that when we meet again is perhaps one of the most moving and powerful stories of all time. So I have to confess, I haven't gotten to that one yet, but after that, I certainly will. Kristin's latest book is The Forest of Vanishing Stars. It came out, just came out just a couple of weeks ago, and it is taking the book world by storm. First week of release, over 8,000 copies. So now there are a lot of us writers that can't claim 8,000 for the whole, so I can see how, yes, this book is taking the whole book world by storm, and we're just again very anxious to have you tell us about The Forest of Vanishing Stars and your other work as well.
That lovely introduction that had me blushing. That was very kind. Thank you. It's truly such an honor to be here. I was able to contribute a very small amount to the building of the room dedicated to you, which was such an honor. And I just feel very honored and very grateful to be here. And I feel so honored and grateful that all of you have come today. That means a lot. I know it's always easy to make it to something on a Monday afternoon. Yeah, wait, is it Monday? I think it's Monday. It's all lost track of it. But thank you so much. This really means a lot to me. So I'm going to begin by giving about a 15-minute talk, sort of more of a prepared talk about The Forest of Vanishing Stars. So I can tell you a little bit about where it came from, what inspired it, some of the research that went into it. Then I'll do a very brief reading. It's only about 2 or 3 minutes long, just to give you a little taste of the book. And then I would love to open it up to your questions. I love taking questions. I'd be happy to talk about some of the things you brought up if you want. And anything you'd like to know, I am an open book. Can everybody hear me okay before I start? Okay, fantastic. If at some point I start to fade, just signal me and let me know. So The Forest of Vanishing Stars, which this is it, just came out. It begins in 1922 on a shadowy street corner in Berlin, where a woman named Jerusha lurks in the darkness, waiting for the lights inside an apartment to blink out. Inside the apartment are the Ugners, Siegfried and Elvina, and their young daughter, Inga. Today is Inga's 2nd birthday, and Jerusha, who is 82, and who feels she has a special connection with nature and with God, believes she's been called by the forest itself to kidnap this little girl. And so she does, climbing up the fire escape, tucking the child into the folds of her cloak, disappearing out the window and into the darkness. She renames the girl Yona, Hebrew for dove, for on the little girl's wrist is a birthmark in the shape of a dove, which gets darker and more defined as Yona grows up. Jerusha raises the girl alone in the woods with all the skills she'll need to survive in the wilderness, but virtually no human contact. By the time she's a young woman, Yona knows how to build a shelter for the winter, how to tell the poisonous mushrooms from the nourishing ones, how to use herbs to heal, how to ice fish, how to dress a wound using pastes made from plants, even how to kill a man. But she knows little about how to interact with other people, because Jerusha has always insisted that other humans are dangerous, and if she wants to survive, she must stay hidden in the woods. But then, in March of 1942, Jerusha, who has lived now to the age of 102, dies, leaving Yona completely and utterly alone. She also leaves her with a deathbed secret. I kidnapped you from your parents. They were bad people. We must never go back. Yona, stunned by this revelation, asks why Jerusha has told her, and Jerusha replies, "We are all interconnected, Yona. You know that by now. Once fates intertwine, they are forever linked. Lives are circles spinning across the world, and when they're meant to intersect again, they do." For 2 months after Jerusha's death, Yona wanders the forest alone, flirting with the idea of violating Jerusha's orders. What if she ventured into a village? What if she dared make a human connection? But fear and Jerusha's deathbed warning hold her back. Until one day, after a heavy rain, she's just about to emerge from the hollowed tree trunk where she'd sought shelter from the storm the night before, when she hears a rustling, and a little girl, bruised and bloodied, wearing a star, emerges from the trees and then collapses. Suddenly, Yona's life changes forever. In trying to save the girl and reunite her with her parents, she learns to her absolute horror what is happening in the villages outside the woods. The Germans have arrived. This much Yona knew because she'd heard the bombs, she'd heard the gunfire. But what she didn't know was that they had begun forcing Jews into ghettos and executing them. And this little girl, whose name is Hannah, is running for her life. Yona, of course, must now make a choice. Does she retreat back into the safety of the woods, the only life she can remember? Or does she help this family in desperate need? Of course, she chooses the latter, or this would be a very, very short book. Probably wouldn't even be here. But that changes everything. And she's woefully unprepared for the confusing dynamics of being part of a group of people. For instance, when Hannah's mother accuses her husband of looking at Yona a certain way, Yona doesn't understand. And this prompts a confrontation and a decision that leads to a tragic death. Soon, the woods are filling with refugees, and Yona finds herself on the front line of the people's battle for survival, something she has the tools to help with, especially as a long, cold winter sets in. Set to the backdrop of the Nalibaka Forest, which was in Poland at the dawn of the war and is now in Belarus, Yona and a growing group of refugees must learn to survive, to outrun the Germans, and to navigate the choppy waters of their own love, betrayals, and destinies. It's a story of identity, what determines who we are, our birth parents, the people who raise us, our own decisions, or a mysterious combination of the three. How much power do we have to reshape the fate we're born with? How much control do we have over who we grow into? And which pieces of the past can we take with us? And which can we leave behind? It's also a story of resilience, survival, and almost unbelievable heroism, based on the extraordinary true stories of real-life Jewish refugees who fled into the forests of Eastern Europe and escaped the Nazis that way. The most well-known of these refugee groups in real life was the Bielski Triad, a partisan family camp formed by a man named Tuvia Bielski and three of his brothers. Bielskis were Jews in a small Polish town called Stankowice. And on the 5th of December, 1941, the youngest brother, Aaron, then only 14, was out doing chores around the family farm when the police came and took his parents away. It was a Friday, and by Monday morning, they had been murdered, along with 4,000 other Jews in the area, all of them dumped into a mass grave outside the nearby town of Novogrodic. Aaron fled into the woods, where he reunited with two older brothers, Zeus and Azael, who had fled there already to escape the Germans. Soon their older brother, Tuvia, arrived too. By the summer of 1942, there were 30 in their group. By the end of the war, they would number more than 1,200. And this was not just a group for Jews who happened to find their way into the forest. And it wasn't just a group for armed young adults who wanted to fight back. This was a group that actively sought refugees because they wanted to save as many lives as possible. Aaron, who turned 15 that summer of 1942, was one of the members of the group who risked his life by sneaking into the Jewish ghettos around the forest to warn people about what was happening. Stay and you'll die, he would tell them. Come with us and you'll have a chance to live. And people did come. Men, women, children, the elderly. No one was turned away. Everyone was given protection. And everyone who could work was given responsibilities within the camp. They set up an entire society, a system of survival that way. As part of the research for this book, I was so honored to get to speak with Aaron Bielski, the youngest and only surviving Bielski brother, last summer. So he's 94 now. And as fate would have it, he lives just a couple hours away from me. I live in Orlando, he lives in Palm Beach. What are the odds that I would be writing about something that takes place in Eastern Europe, and the main person I need to talk to is just a few hours away? It was crazy. In a long conversation with him and his wife, Henrika, he told me many things about life in the forest, including one of the lessons he took away from that period of his life. Hardship, he said, teaches a person life. And it's true, isn't it? We don't learn from walking those smooth roads with no obstacles. We learn from the rocky roads, the uncertain paths. That's a lesson I've taken to heart, and it's a lesson that Yona faces in the Forest of Vanishing Stars, too. Another lesson from Aaron Bielski: be nice, if at all possible. He said he learned, it's a great lesson, right? He said he learned that lesson in the woods, and it's a lesson that has stayed with him his whole life. It's such a simple thing to do, to be kind to our fellow man. But sometimes life gets tangled and we forget. What a beautiful reminder from a man who risked his life repeatedly to save others in one of the darkest hours of our modern history. The Forest of Vanishing Stars is not based directly on the Bielski group. In fact, the group at the heart of this story is much smaller and less well organized than the Bielski camp. But it's very much based on the real timeline and the true story of survival of refugees in groups like the Bielski group, the less well-known Zoran group, and other smaller groups throughout the network of forests in that area. And at one point in the book, when Yona and her group flee into the swamp to escape the Germans, they're retracing the real-life steps of Bielski Otriad, who did the same thing when the Germans entered the forest in an attempt to root them out. I also want to share something kind of personal about this book. It was while writing The Forest of Vanishing Stars, a story I was drawn to for reasons I can't really explain, that I found out something interesting about my own history. I've always thought of myself primarily as Irish because my mom's whole side of the family is Irish, and I grew up very close to them and very culturally connected to that side of the family, which came with a strong Irish Catholic tradition. On my father's side, my grandmother's mother was from France, so that was a thread I knew about too. And having lived in Paris myself in my early 20s, I certainly identified with that French piece of my heritage as well. All I knew about my paternal grandfather's side, the Harmel side of my family, was that they were from somewhere in Germany or Eastern Europe and that they were Jewish. I was already 3/4 of the way into writing The Forest of Vanishing Stars when my brother sent me our family tree from Ancestry.com. And guess what? My relatives on my dad's side, the actual Harmels in my family who brought the family name over, were Jews from Poland, not that far away from the area I was writing about in this book. They came to the United States about 50 years before World War II, but they must have left many, many loved ones behind. I can see on the 1910 census that my great-great-grandmother, Rosie Harmel, my grandpa's grandmother, who arrived in the United States in 1891 at the age of 27, spoke Yiddish as her primary language rather than Polish or English, even after she'd been here for decades. I could also see from documents that she had traveled back to Europe on a famous ocean liner called the SS Ile de France in 1933. She was 69 for a visit. She must have still had loved ones there, even then when the storm clouds of World War II were gathering. She returned to the US in October of that year, and I can imagine how terrified she must have been before she died, just over 7 years later, in early 1941, to know what was happening to those loved ones she'd never see again, those loved ones she must have just visited. I don't know that I'm a big believer that stories live in our blood, but like I said, I cannot entirely explain where the idea of The Forest of Vanishing Stars came from, or why I felt so compelled to tell this story. It's very different from my fiction set in France. But I truly felt called to do that, and it's made me wonder about the connection we all have to our pasts, even if we don't know the stories that came before us. That made me think a bit more seriously about the question of identity at the core of this novel too. Yona's a complicated character. She was born to German parents, one of whom we know from the very start is an enthusiastic follower of Hitler, even in 1920. But then she's raised deep in the forest by Yerusha, who comes from a long tradition of Jewish women. And Yona makes decisions that put her not only in league with a group of Jewish refugees, but later with a group of Catholic nuns too. Her path is winding and complicated, and as the story progresses and she learns more about her past, the guilt of who she was born to be weighs heavily on her shoulders. But are we destined to become some version of who our ancestors were? Or do we have the right to choose, to become different, to become better? Can we honor the good things about our heritage while discarding and perhaps even standing up against the bad? Can we change our fate? Do we have the right to? Or does our past always live within us? These are questions that shape Yona's journey through the Forest of Vanishing Stars. And honestly, they're questions I don't have all the answers to. But I think that in life, as Aaron Bielski did so long ago, deep in the woods, we have the right to change the destinies we seem to have been given. If Aaron had stood still, even on that day in December 1941, when the Germans came for his parents, he would have been dead at 14. Instead, he's 94. He's lived 80 more years than fate seemed to have in store for him. But still, even 80 years later, he's irrefutably shaped by his past, both by the things he was born into and the things he became. We all are. I think then that the question of what we choose to do with our time here on Earth is a vital one. And there will be missteps along the way, as there have been in Aaron Bielski's life, as there are in Yona's life in the novel, as there certainly have been in my life, and as I bet there have been in yours. But if we remember that advice that Aaron walked out of the forest with, be nice if at all possible. Maybe we're onto something that can see us through the rest of our lives, regardless of who or where we came from. Where we started will always be a part of us, but I think it's where we finish and what we choose to do along the way that matters. So thank you very much. I appreciate you listening to my little talk about the novel and about the research that went into it. I'm going to read a very short passage just to give you a little taste of it. This is from chapter 1. I don't like to give too much away. It's a portion of chapter 1, and it's the portion of chapter 1 where Jerusha is about to kidnap Inga, the little German girl whose second birthday it is, who will grow up to become Yona, the main character of this novel. And I also like to preface this by saying that the first couple of chapters have a little bit of a dark fairy tale vibe to them, because we're seeing things unfold from Jerusha's viewpoints. Beyond chapter 2, it feels a little bit more like traditional historical fiction. But I like that this woman who may or may not see things greater than herself, but certainly she believes she does. I like that we kind of get a little glimpse into her to start with. So hopefully this gives you a little taste of the book. The Utener's maid, the timid daughter of a dead sailor, had gone home 2 hours before. And it was a few minutes past 10 o'clock when the Uteners finally turned off their lights. Jerusha exhaled. Darkness was her shield. It always had been. She squinted at the closed windows and could just make out the shape of the little girl's infant bed in the room to the right, beyond pale custard curtains. She knew exactly where it was, had been into the room many times when the family wasn't there. She'd run her fingers along the pine rails, had felt the power splintering from the curves. Wood had memory, of course, and the first time Jerusha had touched the bed where the baby slept, she had been nearly overcome by a warm white wash of light. It was the same light that had brought her here from the forest 2 years earlier. She had first seen it in June 1920, shining above the treetops like a personal aurora borealis, beckoning her north. She hated the city, abhorred being in a place built by man rather than God. She knew she had no choice. Her feet had carried her straight to the apartment to bear witness as the raven-haired Frau Utener nursed the baby for the first time. Jerusha had seen the baby glowing even then, a light in the darkness no one knew was coming. She didn't want a child. She never had. Perhaps that was why it had taken her so long to act. But nature makes no mistakes. And now, as the sky filled with a cloud of silent blackbirds over the twinkling city, she knew the time had come. It was easy to climb up the ladder of the modern building's fire escape. Easier still to push open the Utener's unlatched window and slip quietly inside. The child was awake, silently watching, her extraordinary eyes, one twilight blue and one forest green, glimmering in the darkness. Her hair was black as night, her lips startlingly red of corn poppies. I have come for you, Yerusha whispered in Yiddish, a language the girl would not yet know. She was startled to realize that her heart was racing. She didn't expect a reply, but the child's lips parted. And she reached out her left hand, palm upturned, the dove-shaped birthmark shimmering in the darkness. She said something soft, something that a lesser person would have dismissed as the meaningless babble of a little girl. But to Yerusha, it was unmistakable. "Du sit hier," said the girl in Yiddish. "It is you." "Yo, du speak," Yerusha agreed. And with that, she picked up the baby, who didn't cry out, and tucking her close against the brittle curves of her body, climbed out the window and shimmied down the iron rail, her feet hitting the sidewalk without a sound. From the folds of Yerusha's cloak, the baby watched soundlessly, her mismatched ocean eyes frowned, as Berlin vanished behind them, and the forest to the north swallowed them whole. So that's just a little bit of chapter 1. So throw them at me. What have you got? Anybody? Yes.
How did you find out about these forest groups? I mean, I've never heard that before.
So that is such a great question. The question was, how did I find out about these forest groups? She had never heard of them before. A lot of us had never heard of them before. It's one reason why I love telling these World War II stories, and why I feel like it's such an important thing to do, because I think there are so many stories from the past that have such relevance today, that can change the way we look at our own lives, change the way we look at the world. And I think that makes them important to tell, and important to tell in a way that's hopefully memorable and accessible. But as far as how I found out about this story, I had known about the fact that refugees survived in the forests of Eastern Europe. I've known about that since probably early 2009, because there was a beautiful film called Defiance made that was about the Pacquiao brothers. It was a wonderful film. It starred Daniel Craig as Tuvia Bielski. So even if you have zero interest in this story, I mean, there's really nothing wrong with watching Daniel Craig learn about the forest. So I would recommend you to both me for that. No, it's a great book, and it really does justice. I mean, a great movie that does justice truly to the story. Not all movies get it right, but I think this one really, really gets it right. And it's actually based on a nonfiction book of the same name, which was one of the resources I used in the research. So I knew vaguely about the story, but that was long, long before I was writing World War II. I didn't transition to writing about World War II until, actually, maybe it wasn't long before. It was a little while before. I think I wrote my first my first World War II book in 2010. It came out in 2012. So maybe it was only about a year and a half before I started writing that. But it wasn't something that I looked at and thought, I'll write a book about this someday. It was something that I watched the movie and thought, gosh, that's inspiring. And then walked away and, kind of got on with my life. But I've written several World War II novels set in France, which has been great. And my next one is set in France also. I lived in Paris for a little while. I have French family heritage. I feel very connected to that place and to telling stories about that place. And what's not to like about research that makes you go to Paris and other cases Champagne, smartest decision ever. I wrote a book set in Champagne, France, which really means you just have to go drink a lot of champagne, which is not a bad thing. But I really wanted to stretch myself. I wanted to challenge myself with something I knew was going to be difficult and I knew was going to be different. And this felt like the story to do it with. And I don't know if you can tell from my, little frilly red dress and high heels, that I'm not much of a forest person. I wish I was, but this was a challenge, learning about how to survive in the forest. That's not something that I grew up knowing about. It's not something that comes naturally to me. And you all live, those of you who live here, live in such a beautiful place. You write place so beautifully. Your husband wrote place so beautifully, and place plays such a big role in this novel. And I think that there's something about that natural environment that speaks to us. And I had never done that before. I had never written that way about interacting with nature, interacting about the natural, with the natural environments. And this was a challenge. This allowed me to do that, but to still tell a story that had the same core as my other stories, which I think the thread that runs through all of my World War II books is that they are all about ordinary people finding within themselves the ability to be extraordinary, which is something I think we all have within us. And finding also a way to be the light in the darkness when we're faced with dark times. So it is still a book that has very much the same feel as my other books, but it's different and I wanted to stretch. That was a really long answer to a short question. Did that answer? What else can I answer? At length. What else can I give you a 20-minute answer to?
No, it can be short. I'm interested in, I mean, you say you have another novel in your mind or that you started on. Your process of writing, I mean, do you have a special chair or do you start out one morning and finish it in a week or, you know, how do you do that?
My process takes about a year start to finish, including going through the copy edits and everything. The end of the copy edits for one book overlap with the beginning of the research for the next book. So, and that's always kind of a strange thing to be touring and talking about one book when my head is already kind of in the next one. This one I'm not so mixed up because this takes place in Eastern Europe and the next one takes place in France, but I have done book tour events before where people ask me questions and I'm completely talking about the wrong book. So maybe I need to slow the pace a little bit, but or just, I don't know. Yeah, so my process is I research for a few months to really acclimate myself to the world, to get the facts down, to get the dates down, to get sort of the framework of the story, once I have that basic idea for a story. And it's while doing that research that the characters really begin to come alive in my head. And I don't put anything down on paper about them yet, because I like them to just be forming in the back of my mind, while the front of my mind is focused on reading, you know, books and books and books and watching survivor testimony and, you know, things like that, interviews with people, just filling my head with everything I can and taking as many notes as I can. So that beginning process takes me a few months. And by the time that's over, I kind of have an idea of how the story's going to begin, how the story's going to end, and some of the things in the middle, and who the characters are going to be. So from there, I sit down and I write a very long outline. Some writers outline extensively, some writers just sit down and begin writing and pound out a first draft and then do, you know, a thorough edit later. I am in the outlining camp and I write easy outlines. My outlines are about 20,000 words and one of my finished books is about 100,000 words. So it has occurred to me recently, after I've spent years and years telling everyone, you have to outline, I outline, that perhaps I'm actually not outlining. Maybe I'm just writing a really, really, really sparse first draft. So maybe it's somewhere between the two. But that's where I figure out what the story is going to be and what the majority of the beats of the story are going to be, without censoring anything, without saying to myself, oh, that sentence doesn't sound pretty, or, oh, I have to pause here and describe this. It's just whatever comes out of my head falls onto that piece of paper. Sometimes it has dialogue, sometimes it has action, sometimes it doesn't. You know, sometimes I have a sentence that'll represent a chapter later. Sometimes I've virtually written a whole chapter. But essentially, by the time I finish that outline, I have that story down. And it's during the writing of that outline, I also do more research because now I know exactly what's going in the book, and I'm more clear about the blanks I need to fill in. So I fill in those blanks as I'm going with the outline, and then I sit down and write. I begin writing from chapter 1, and I write in a linear fashion from I don't use words very well. From the beginning. I started at the very beginning and write straight through to the end. I don't skip chapters. Even if it's a dual timeline story, which this one is not, but a lot of my stories are, I still write it beginning to end. And it's while I'm writing that I'm now seeking out primary sources. So in the case of this book, Aaron Bielski was someone I talked to while I was writing the book. And another person I talked to while I was writing the book was a ecotourism guide who leads expeditions into the Nalbaki forest and who answered 20 questions a day for me. I mean, I paid him by the hour because there's no way I could have, asked somebody to give me that kind of information from his brain because it took just so much time. I could not have written the book without him. So it was things like, I would say, I understand how they build the Zemlyankas, which are the underground dwellings where they live in the winter to survive a cold winter in the forests of Eastern Europe. I know how they build those, but I can't really wrap my head around how they build a stove and a heat source and something they can cook within, I don't really understand that. You would go out in the forest and give me a step-by-step tutorial of how to make mud bricks, including sending me pictures of discarded mud brick molds from the 1940s. I mean, so every question had an answer like that. If I said, they're in this particular area of the forest. Someone has been cut badly, they need to stop the bleeding. Would they use this herb? And he'd say they would use this herb, but they'd have to travel 30 kilometers to the north. So in this particular part of the forest, these 4 herbs would be the ones they might have chosen. And this one would be the best one to use in this situation for this reason. I mean, it was everything I needed to know. And so I feel like he brought the forest alive, and Aaron gave a heartbeat to the people who were there, to me. It was one thing to read about it, one thing to watch videos of people talking about their experience. And I felt like I had really absorbed the ins and outs of it. The details, the little teeny tiny details, but it wasn't until talking to him that I felt it in my heart, if that makes sense. And so I was really honored and lucky that both of them were willing to share their time with me. So,
Thank you.
what else can I answer? Yes.
How do you choose your characters' names?
How do I choose the character names? It varies from book to book. I use a lot of lists of the top 100 names in 1920 in France, for example, if I'm writing about France, characters in the 1940s in France. For this book, I used a lot of Holocaust documents to find names of survivors and victims of the Holocaust in that particular area of Poland. But for this one also, one of the things that I did was some of the names have special meaning. So Yona, obviously, I think I mentioned, she is named that by the old woman because she has a dove on her wrist, and they feel that has special meaning, and so her name means dove. Some of the names do have meaning, but I think I know there are some writers with us today, some authors here with us today. Would you agree that names have a certain feel to them also? So even if something looks right on paper, even if it's okay, this is the number 5 most popular girl's name in 1920, so this would fit. Like, there's just something about it that doesn't quite fit the character, so it has to be. What's that? It has to hit you. I used to teach writing classes a long time ago, back in the early part of my career when I was writing chick lit, like romantic comedy. And I used to say, you cannot name the same character. It's not interchangeable. You couldn't say, if you name her Sunshine, she'd be a different character than if you named her Gertrude, right? Like, they just become totally different things. And just reading it on the page or hearing it in an audiobook, you have a different internal reaction even as the reader. So that's a part of it too, to just make sure, that the names, even if they're correct to the period or correct to the culture, they have to hit you here. And it's funny, in this book, there was a character whose name is now Zeus. If anybody's read the book, he enters about midway through the book. He's kind of this like sexy, like forest guy who can do everything, and he's like carrying, weight of the world on his shoulders. His name was always Baruch to me. He was Baruch in the first draft, and he's still Baruch to me. And I turned it in, and my editor said, that's not a sexy name. And I was like, well, I like Baruch. He's Baruch. And she was like, he's not Baruch. And I said, please can you be Baruch? And she was like, yeah. So he's now Zeus, which is equally nice. But so sometimes the names that feel right to you do not feel right to everybody. And I will take that. I will take the feedback. So good question. What else can I answer? Anything? Anybody?
One more question.
Yeah.
I mean, if anyone has one more question.
Yeah, we have time for more.
Well, this is a question, I'll have a comment.
Sure.
I thought that was interesting how you said that you outline, you already know what's gonna happen basically, because I think it's so funny when you're hearing an artist speak sometimes and she'll say, well, I didn't know she was gonna do that. And I'm like, what do you mean you didn't know it? You're the one who wrote it. And I hear that a lot. I'm like, I didn't know it until it happened. I'm like, wait, you wrote it. And I'm like, where did that come from?
Well, I will tell you, that does happen. And that is what accounts for changes between the outline and the first draft of the book. Because you write these characters that you think you know so well, but it's not until you set them in motion on the page that they really do begin to take on a life of their own. And you sometimes get to a point, at least I do, I get to a point in the outline where something I had happening that I needed to have happened to get from this point to this point no longer make sense, because if you just know, like the character, now that I know her, I know she wouldn't do that, and you have to find out a different way forward. But yes, that's an interesting note, because it does make us sound like crazy people with people in our heads, and I'm not going to deny that that's the case. We are a little crazy. The voices in my head told me exactly. And can I answer anything else? Yes.
You wrote the book during COVID,
Yes.
correct? Do you think, because you could travel and you were able to talk to the forest guy in depth over the phone or, Zoom or whatever, do you think you received more information that way as if, or if you were there?
That's a great question. First of all, I would say that my advice to you all, if you would like to write books, is do not plan to write a book set in Belarus at the beginning of a worldwide pandemic. I could, yeah, I mean, it figures that the year that I'm like, I'm gonna write a place that, it's totally new to me, it would be the year that the world shuts down. So I truly could not have written this book without him, because, like when I wrote The Winemaker's Wife, which was my 2019 novel, that was set in Champagne, I had resources just like him, who I could ask questions of, who were very helpful, were very generous with their time. But I couldn't describe the smell of a champagne cave without walking into one. I couldn't describe the feel of the chalk of a champagne cave's wall, the cool feel of it, without, because you can't call somebody and say, how does your wall feel? Or like, how does it sound when you walk into something? Then they just can't, you sound like a crazy person, which again, as we've established, maybe I am, but I think I had more of those tiny details, like how to make a mud brick, or which herb to use in which part of the forest, because I had him. But I also think it took a long time for he and I to get there in our relationship of working together, because I think it took a while for him to understand that that's what I wanted, that it was not just what is the answer to this that I would find in a textbook, it was what is the answer to this that you know, because you know how to survive in the forest, and you've lived in this forest for 30 years and you've heard all the story, so I would like to think that if I had gone there, he would have been the person I would have gone to, and the story might have been a little bit, the story probably would have been a little bit richer, or the setting would have been a little bit richer if I had the chance to go. But I will say that I worked harder than I've ever worked on a book, because I was working at a deficit, because I was working without having been to that forest. And I mean, he wasn't the only person I went to for help or for those details, but he was the one who really helped me most. So
You have plans to travel there?
I don't have plans to travel there yet, but I would love to travel there someday. It is, I'm on a book tour right now for the Forest of Vanishing Stars, and Pacquiao plans my tours. I told her a few months ago when we were planning this, I didn't feel comfortable getting on a plane yet. So this is because I didn't know a few months ago how I was gonna feel. Like now I probably do feel comfortable getting on a plane. I'm not sure that I feel comfortable pulling the, saying like, yeah, let's travel internationally yet. Like I think I'm just not there. And I'm just being a little bit more cautious, sorry. I'm being a little bit more cautious because I have a 5-year-old. So who's obviously not vaccinated. And so yes, eventually, but probably not anytime soon. It's a good question. I'm getting the watch sign, but okay, thank you all so much for being here today.
All of you will join us for some refreshments and get a chance to get a book and get it signed by Kristin.
And thank you to Buford Bookstore.
Yes, thank you so much to
Buford
you.
Bookstore, yes, to Kathy and Pat and our docents and everybody who made this possible. Thank you. And come back to our next. I should be able to say what our next step is.